While traveling and studying in Europe for 3 months, I came into contact with many different cultures and types of people. As an American college student, I was stereotyped differently in the various countries that I visited, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. I will comment on my experiences in the different cities I visited, but I can only speak for what I experienced with the people that I met. This is not to say every American would have the same experience I had in these cities, but I will comment on what I observed during my 3 months abroad. The majority of my time spent abroad was spent in London, where I was living and studying. This is also the place where I experienced the most stereotyping. The British had many British isms, some of which included speaking quietly in public, standing and walking closely together, and avoiding public scenes or confrontations. As a group of 28 students, we often traveled together. On the tube, we would get looks from the British as if they were trying to tell us to be quiet. Once one of the students was actually shushed on the tube. Americans tend to speak more loudly in restaurants than the British do. I remember when my family came to visit was the first time I really noticed how I had already learned to subconsciously lower my voice in public. My sister and parents seemed to be speaking so loudly. Other stereotypes some British people imposed upon me included wanting to eat fast food. Once my friend and I asked for a recommendation for somewhere to eat, and they directed us to the nearest McDonald's. In addition to London, we traveled to 3 other cities as a group around England: Oxford, Stratford, and Bath. People in these smaller, less urban cities seemed to be much friendlier and interested in us than they were in London. I'm not sure exactly why this is, but it may have to do with the very touristy areas we visited in these cities, so the people living and working there were probably very used to American tourists. My experience in Belgium was extremely positive. People in Brussels speak French, so I didn't have an easy time communicating with them, although most knew at least some English. Everyone I encountered was so friendly and tried to be as helpful as possible. I remember sitting in a restaurant reading a magazine while I waited for my train, and I saw American music videos playing on a television. The guy who was serving me a drink asked if I was British. I said no, that I was from America, bracing myself for a negative reaction. Yet he proceeded to raise his eyebrows, glance at the TV, and say, "America? What a dream." The areas of Edinburgh that we visited were very touristy, and therefore the reception we were met with as Americans was almost always positive. This seemed to be a trend in many touristy areas of cities that I visited. Places that were known by locals, not by tourists, tend to give us a more authentic reaction than places that cater to tourists. Although this was not always a positive reaction, I felt that it was more genuine. Since nearly everywhere we visited in Edinburgh was catered very much to tourists, most people I met were accommodating and seemed to be interested in Americans. Dublin was the friendliest place of all the cities I visited last semester. I think it helped knowing someone from Dublin. I stayed with my friend while I was there. Again, American music was present in many places I visited. However, all the places I went to at night had live Irish music playing as well. It was evident that they were proud of their cultural heritage. I was even invited on the stage at one of the venues while they were performing. The people I met in Dublin were fascinated with Americans and asked my friend and I so many questions about where we were from and what it was like in America. I traveled to the south of France with my own set of stereotypes. I was expecting snooty attitudes and rich French people, but I was certainly surprised. Most people in the south of France that I encountered spoke little to no English. I remember trying to order an iced coffee. Apparently this doesn't exist in France. The lady serving me coffee did her best to understand exactly what I wanted and put together an iced coffee in a martini glass. It was so funny, but the exchange was very sweet. She couldn't fully understand what I wanted, but she was so accommodating in trying to make it for me. Everyone I met in the south of France was kind and helpful. I had a similar experience in Ventimiglia, since it was so close to the south of France. We were only there for a day. Everyone there spoke either Italian or French, so again it was not easy to communicate. My friends and I ate lunch at this little outdoor Italian restaurant, and there was an older lady who was clearly running things. We were confused as to where we were supposed to order, and although she could not understand me, with a big smile she sent someone over to our table. Paris was the place where I experienced the least favorable attitudes towards Americans. We were there for a weekend as a group. When we were traveling on the metro together, we would often feel many looks coming our way, similar to what we experienced on the tube in London. In restaurants, we experienced both good and bad reactions to our big groups of American students going out to eat. Some waiters would be delighted in serving and talking to a group of American students. Others seemed utterly annoyed. Before arriving in Paris, we were told to try and use as much French as we could with people in Paris to ask for directions because they appreciated the effort. However, when we did use our French to ask someone for directions, we were often met with a strange look and a quick response in English. Overall, my time abroad was an unbelievable and eye-opening experience. It caused me to reflect on who I am and what it means to be an American. I learned so much about other cultures and other ways of life. I hope to return to Europe one day very soon.